What's up, riders? Kevin Wilson with the BMXPERTS podcast. Thank you very much for stopping by. Thank you very much for all the support, subscriptions, and all the other good stuff. Very excited tonight. We have a very special guest on coming from Seattle, right? This is Bothell. Where the hell you live, Kent?
Well, I live north of Spokane, so we'll just call it north of Spokane. I used to live in Bellevue.
Kent Lowry, north of Spokane, hot shoe back in the 80s in the Pacific Northwest. Knows a lot of people, raced a lot of big names, threw a lot of elbows. Kent, welcome to the show. I appreciate you coming by, bro. So, you grew up in Bothell, right?
Bellevue.
Okay. You see, I get everything wrong, man. Sorry about that.
Oh, that's all right.
Hey, so I'm super stoked to hear about the Pacific Northwest. I talked to your boy Danny last week, and Danny was singing your praises, like you were his inspiration on a BMX bike, and I want to hear all your stories, man. So, how did you come across BMX back then? How old were you? What's your backstory, dude?
Well, my backstory, when I was 15 years old, when I think I was 15 when I met Danny V and some other guys at Bike Factory in Bellevue. And I remember seeing a poster with bike racing, and I was like, where is this? And so we talked to our parents, and I got a ride to the racetrack, the local one, which was the Bothell BMX track. I had a mongoose with tough wheels. It probably weighed about 128 pounds. It was just a tank. But at the time, we rode all kinds of stuff. We rode trails, but nothing official for racing. But we were really into jumping and also doing nose wheelies without brakes. Instead of doing a front manual, we do a nose manual.
Yeah. Nice, dude. When you say you had a mongoose, you had a Moto Mag gusseted mongoose, right? You didn't have a Super Goose or something.
Yeah. No, I didn't have a Super Goose, and they had low clearance too. You probably remember that.
And with tough wheels on it. How did you like those tough wheels? Yeah, I raced tough wheels one time and I couldn't stand them. Did you like them?
The only thing about them is you don't have to true the spokes. That's about the only thing good.
I hear you, man. I hear you, dude. So I
got a story.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, I got a story for you. This is probably a little bit ahead of the game, but I was a 17 expert, and I was at the time for a small local race. I was dominating my competition pretty good. At least I felt. There was a couple of guys that would give me some stiff times, but I decided to take my beater bike, the one I trained on, that weighed 128 pounds, and I brought it to the racetrack. And I went ahead and raced the first moto with it. Of course, I got my doors blown away because this thing was an absolute tank. And then a rumor went around that I got my bike stolen. It was hilarious. But, they say the bike doesn't matter on the racetrack, but it does matter if it's substantially heavier than everybody else's.
Yeah, dude. When you were before you were riding trails before you even got on a track, or no?
Well, yeah, we rode trails. There used to be a place with a whole bunch of whip-to-dos because there was a motocross track. A bunch of guys with Suzukis and Yamahas would practice at where Microsoft is now. It used to be nothing but just dirt and trails. And I remember just riding through those whip-to-dos and kind of developing some skills, starting to learn how to manual through them. I didn't even know what the word manual was. And I just remember those days. Actually, my very first bike was a girl's bike that my dad bought me. And I rode that around my teens. I was like, whatever. Got the frame or something out. My dad wrapped it up and adjusted it. So not here to.
Your sound's messed up, dude. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can see that. I can hear you now.
Okay. All right. So when now I messed up all my questions, dude. So you had the mongoose. You're racing. So your first race was on the mongoose, or you upgraded by that point when you had your first race?
No, my first race was mongoose. It was at home. I do remember that quite vividly. In fact, I was concerned that my parents think bike racing stuff is dangerous. I really did think that. But once my parents saw, a couple races, they realized this was good, and they did okay. My first beginner or an intermediate race was second place. I got second. And I thought, all. And I should mention that it was a 1 foot start. Do you guys remember those? Where you had 1 foot on the ground, the gate was kind of flat, and they didn't make them steep enough. Probably within a month they started changing that, so then we could balance.
For the guys that are watching, can someone comment if you could hear Kent? I can't hear him, and I don't want to end the stream if you guys can hear him. If someone could comment, I appreciate it. I'm gonna ask you an open-ended question, dude, and just go for it, because I don't know. It's possible that someone out there that it's going through everybody else, but just not me. So you got a 1 foot start. You're racing. You're on your mongoose, and I didn't hear the part of how you did on your first race. You were a 13 beginner, or 14 beginner, something like that.
15x.
What, your first race was 15x?
Yep. No. Sorry. Beginner. I'm sorry. 15. And I got second. My first race.
You got a second. Did you have you had a beginner class?
Correct. I think what I was going to share with you is in 3 months I turned 15 expert. And that was unusual to go through all the classes, win that many races that quickly. So 3 months, I turned 15x.
So you got 6 firsts in 3 months, and you became expert, right? Was it three?
Well, I
three
had
first place.
No, I think at 3 first places you would transfer. That sounds very familiar. But I had a second. My first race, I got a second, and then I raced, I think 3 more races, and then I transferred into the next class, which I think it was even more money for the next class. But anyhow, I progressed from there. How's the sound? Any change?
I can't hear a word you're saying, dude. I hope that people out there can hear you. It's not that the microphone's messed up. It's the internet connection.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So up in the Seattle area, there must have been. I know that down here in Southern California, we had a bunch of fast guys. Up there, when I first started, I raced 16. I was a 16 beginner, and there was never any 16 beginners for me to race. So they always put me with the 16 experts. So I was always real comfortable racing 16x. But you actually had a 15 beginner class, dude. So that's great for you, man, because I'm glad you didn't have to race 15x. What was the competition up like up there? Were you guys looking down on Southern California like we want to go down there, or were you guys handling your own business up there? Where you forget Southern California, we're handling business up here?
There was a lot of competition, actually. Seattle's a big area, and Redmond, which is near Tacoma, is actually the bicycle capital of Washington, and so there was a lot of bicyclists. I mean, we had full gates, and there was a big class in the intermediate, and expert was pretty big also.
Some of the big names that you were throwing bars with when you were expert. Who was up there? Who was the local hotshot that you were chasing when you turned 16X or whatever, or 15X? Who were the big names?
Well, some of the guys that were pretty stiff competition was obviously Gary Ellis. There was the Gardner brothers, Kurt Gardner. Maybe that sounds familiar to you guys. In fact, Kurt Gardner. There was other names. There was Damon Johnson, Sean Peters, Dave Balance. Those were some local guys, and they were good. They were definitely good, and they had good bikes, and they had parents that backed them with good parts.
The parents are always important, man. And my parents, they weren't against it, but they weren't like real heavily supported on it either. What were your parents like?
Well, it's interesting. I was surprised that my parents were willing to let me race BMX bikes. And so I figured out years later, in fact, my mother even told me this, that they thought it was a good idea, because then I wasn't out riding around with the other kids in the neighborhood that were creating a lot of havoc. So they saw it as an opportunity to keep their son and daughter, in a healthier environment. The thing is that when kids in neighborhoods are playing around and their parents aren't back from work, they start kind of turning into a pack of dogs. You know what I mean? I mean, they go out or do shouldn't do, and my parents didn't want me to, continue in that direction. So they completely endorsed BMX, and it never, they just kept financing it. We traveled all over the United States.
What's the farthest that you went?
But interesting enough, I never raced the East Coast. I raced, Arizona, California, Nevada, Utah, Canada, obviously Washington, Texas a couple times, but mostly this half of the United States.
Nice. Did you guys have the full motorhome and the whole get up with the family and the whole 9 yards, or were you guys traveling in the Chevy Caprice with a bike rack on the back?
No, we had a bike rack in the back. My dad was driving a 1966 Buick Riviera with a 400. It was cool. Everybody, whenever we'd show up to a racetrack, all the husbands would just walk over to this car and want to talk to my dad all about it. I mean, that's what it was all about. It was a cool car.
Nice, dude.
My dad kept that car all the way until he passed away. I mean, he had it for a very long time. Apparently, they're worth a lot of money now. So. Yeah,
definitely, man. So when you're dicing it up at the local track, I look back at when I was at the local track. I'd ride my bike up there if I couldn't get a ride, or I would hitch a ride with somebody else, or I would do anything I could to get to the track. And once I got to the track, it was always like, the politics and the who's who and who got a new ride and who got a new bike and that type of thing. What was the technology like up there? Were you guys having the same type of bikes that we had down here? What was there? Because at the tracks where I was in Azusa, it was typically like, Hutch, JMC. Well, that was JMC hotbed down here. JMC, SE, that type of thing. And then I talked to a guy that was from New Jersey. All they had were thrusters. What was the bike of choice up there in the Pacific Northwest during your time?
Well, I'm glad you asked. You know, there was quite a few good bike shops in the Tacoma area where the Lumberjack Nationals were being held, you know, annually or biannually. So there was a lot of good bike shops, but that was in Tacoma, and that was an hour away from where I lived. But there was a bike shop called the Bike Factory. They don't exist anymore, but they had two stores, one in Hawaii and one in Bellevue. And that was a pretty high-end place. They had really, really nice top-notch stuff. I mean, Bellevue is kind of a ritzy area. People got money. And so there were plenty of rich kids to drop the dollars on those good bikes. So we absolutely had everything you guys had down there in California, definitely. So some of the bikes that we had, boy, you name it. I mean, we had GT, we had Mongoose, which was good at the time. We had Hutch. Of course, Hutch, I don't think Hutch was out when I first started racing. I don't think they existed yet. But we had, you know, other good brands. There was a lot of them. You probably heard of Torker.
Yeah.
That was those started gaining popularity. You probably heard of DG. Remember those bikes? DG.
Yeah.
Yep.
Growing up, I always thought that DG stood for Dan Gurney. And it doesn't.
You know what? I thought the same thing too. Now, here's a really old bike, and I don't even know if you guys ever heard of it, but there was a bike called Webco, a frame by Webco. Yeah.
One of the first,
that was
right?
a good bike. Yep. They also had we also had some quad angles. As soon as those things came out, those were on the scene. So, hey, I wanted to talk to you about, so I went from 15 expert, got older, started racing 16 expert, and my sister, I had a sister that was racing bikes too. She was in the 13 to 14 class. And of course, there wasn't a lot of girls at the time, but there was enough to form a class. And she actually got pretty good at it herself. She actually got number 2 in her district, and she was on the national circuit. We early on, both my sister and I started getting recognized in bike racing. And we actually had a couple different factory offers to be full factory. And the interesting thing is that was a BMX kid's dream to be on a factory team.
Absolutely.
And I remember that so here I am. I'm and we had gone to a few nationals, mainly just what was in Washington and what was in Oregon. And both my sister and I were actually very good on our bikes. And the interesting thing is, since we're minors, those sponsors went and talked to my parents first, which is only logical to do. And my parents kind of had, I think, an unreasonable request. If I was going to be sponsored by a factory team, they wanted them to take my sister too. And some of these teams already had a girl, or it was the other way around. They already had a 17 expert or 16 expert, but they didn't have girls on their team to complete their whole team profile. And so my parents were kind of odd in that they said, nope, if you can't take both of them, then no deal. And so I know we lost a factory opportunity there. Another time there was another factory offer, I think it was from L, and they wanted, they just wanted me. Now, if you think about it, this is 40 years ago. I can't remember all the details, but 40 years ago, I remember talking to my parents about it, and my dad was uncomfortable with me or my sister being away from home if they were not there with us. And so their requests, I thought, kind of unreasonable, and that they were expecting that our factory ride would cover their airfare, my airfare, and my sister's airfare. That's a lot of expense. And so we had some opportunities that got shot down. And when I learned about that, I was not happy with my dad. It kind of put a little bit of a rift for a while there, because, you know, I didn't see any danger of me traveling people that I didn't know, because we're all kind of like a BMX family, right? And so that was a real bummer. So I did not end up with much more than just a small sponsor. You know, some local sponsors. Vans Tennis Shoes was sending me tennis shoes, so I didn't have to buy any tennis shoes. But, you know, so I never actually ended up with a factory ride.
Wow, dude. So I think you said Elf, and what was the other one?
Well, I think earlier when we were talking, my parents did not want to disclose it, but I suspect it was Mongoose, because I wanted to go talk to him. My parents said, I've already talked to him. It's not going to happen.
Oh,
so
wow.
Okay, well,
What year are we talking about when this happened?
Okay, so I started racing when I was in 1981. That's when I started. And so that would have been 1982 and 3.
Okay.
And then when I was 16 years old, I was winning a lot of races. Not always some of the really big ones. Sometimes I made the national mains. Sometimes I did. But if it was a double point race or a triple point race or a state championship race, I won a lot of races. And then finally I obtained the #1 plate, which you've seen in some of the pictures. And I ran that for a whole year. And I was successful enough to the point where I decided one day that I would go through the ABA magazine and actually look at how many points I had as a 17 expert. And I went through every single state in those magazines. And I found out that I had more points than any other 17 expert in the nation, but they weren't national points. And there's a difference. But if you look at it that way, I was national #1 in points as a 17 expert, but weren't national points. And so, you know, it's a lot of money. I mean, my parents spent a lot of money driving around, flying around to all these different places. And I wanted to talk about something that I think kind of levels the playing field. I realized that if it wasn't for my parents being willing to take me to all these races, I wouldn't have been able to do what I did. I wouldn't have never got really known. And so when you really think about anybody's fame, I don't care who you are, I don't care if you're a 5-time world champion, ultimately you owe that fame, that history to your parents, your sponsors, your team manager, because without that help, you know, you can't do it. You just can't do it on your own. I mean, once you get into your 20s and you can drive to these tracks, but, you know, working a full-time job and being able to afford to travel, it's hard. But if you got a team sponsor, that's really key.
Yeah, dude. So you said that you never you didn't ride for the bike shop, right? You rode for Vans. Is that what you said?
Yep.
Wow, dude. So
and it was not a factory sponsor.
Go ahead. Can you hear me?
You're cutting out.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah,
dude,
a little bit. It's chopping up.
It's terrible.
We might have to do this again.
Yeah, dude.
But
what I want to do is I'm going to go back through this. I'm going to cut it up. I'm going to do reels out of it for the part that's salvageable, and then we could do another one some other time. But so what was the was there any bike that you wish you would have had back in the day that you would have traded your Mongoose or whatever? And was there one bike that you think, you know what, you know, or one bike that you like, you would never change it? Like, I would never want to replace my JMC Andy Patterson. Was there a bike that you thought that you might have been able to do a little bit better on, or were you happy with what you had? The Elf. I think you said you got an Elf.
No, I didn't Elf. They were considering sponsoring, but that didn't happen. So I was just going to tell you, I had like My first bike was a Mongoose. My next bike was a Torker. After that, it was a Pro Magnum. I liked the Pro Magnum. It was really, truly a 4130 steel frame. I mean, it was really the real thing. I think there's some bikes that were made that said 4130 on them. I question whether they really were 4130. But this was a real 4130 frame, and it lasted for years. I mean, I raced on that from 16 expert, 17 expert, and a short time as a pro. That's how long that frame held up. In fact, I never broke it. I outgrew it. It was too short. In fact, here's something you might find rather fascinating. Do you ever remember hearing of a stem called ESP?
ESP? Yeah.
So that was that was being manufactured locally in Tacoma. I think it was Marty Enid. His dad was a track operator, and anyhow, they designed a stem that was longer because early on in the early 80s, there wasn't a manufacturer that was providing a frame that really fit tall people. And I'm not that tall, but I mean, think about the progression of BMX bikes. They were just for kids initially. The manufacturers never thought that grown adults would be racing these things. And so, at least as adults. And so everybody as we were getting older and the age groups were getting older, the bikes were getting too small. And so manufacturers were starting to come out with longer stems to enlarge the room you had on that bike. And so that enabled me to keep that pro size frame a lot longer. And I should mention that pro size frame by today's standard was really just barely bigger than an expert, between an expert and a pro. And so back to your first question about, so what would be my favorite frame? Well, I finally landed on a frame that I really liked, and it was called a Kasten. But before that, I had an S&M Holmes, and that was a good bike, but it was heavy. It was really heavy. It was actually a little bit too big for me. And I guess I could get a little technical on you, but I'd love to share some secrets. I don't mind giving away secrets about what helped me be a champion. But one of the things that I learned is people have to be willing to experiment. So like if you have your own homemade gate at home, like a 2-man gate, you need to actually time yourself how long it takes you to get from point A to point B, and try different handlebar positions, try different handlebar heights, and practice your snaps and try to get your form down, because that's critical. In fact, most races are determined by who can get down the track 50 feet first. I mean, in fact, a lot of times the first 15 feet determines whether or not you're going to win that race or not, because you know how it is, you get closed in on the handlebars and you're done. So your snap is really important. Your body posture in relation to to your cranks. Hey, I don't know if you've ever lifted weights, but I used to do some deadlifting when I was working out with Danny V, and you can't lift up anything heavy if it's too far out in front of you. Okay. So the closer it is to your body, the more power you have. And it's the same thing when you're standing over a set of cranks. You want your body as straight up over those cranks as possible. So whenever you see pros snapping out of the gate, they have a body between as close to those handlebars as possible, not just to throw their momentum forward to get a good snap, but it also has a lot to do with leverage. Which brings me to my next point that I wanted to talk about. I got to tell you this story. I think you'll find this fascinating. So when I was a brand new racer, I was about 15 years old. I think I was 15, maybe I was 16. One of the things our friends like to do is go over to the local high school, because they had all these hills and construction that was going on. And we had some jumps that we were kind of fabricating. And we had this idea that we're going to ride our bikes off of this loading zone that you back a truck up to. So nobody could work up the nerve to do it. So I went ahead and flew off of it, dropped my back tire down, And when I landed, I thought I landed pretty good, but I bent my cranks. And I think everybody's had a chance to bend a set of cranks, some one-piece Tiogi cranks. So after I bent those, I ended up riding home, and I told my dad I bent my cranks. And we had a race the next day. So my dad goes down to the local bike shop, and they didn't have any chrome cranks. But the guy said, I do have these old cranks. They're not chrome, and they were called Ashtabula. Remember those?
Yep.
Black Ashtabulas. So my dad puts them on the bike, gets them all ready, and this is a very interesting story. Those Ashtabulas were 192 millimeters. 192 millimeters. Now, most people in 1981 were running 175s or maybe 177s, and even people were running 170s. We're talking pros. 175 was very common. Nobody
180.
had
180 for me. 180.
Finally, 180s came out, but maybe it was my local shop just didn't have stuff like that.
What kind of bike would 192s come off of? What bike would have a stock 192 crank on it?
That's a great question. It's been so long. I want to say that I don't really know. That's a great question. I don't remember ever seeing I think I do know. I think it may have came on one of those old banana seat bikes that had a shifter in the middle and it was a 5-speed. I think those might have came with Ashtabula cranks.
Okay.
But either way, here's why I bring it up. My dad, I had never taken a bottom bracket apart at 15 years old. So my dad took the bottom bracket apart, put it all together, put all the same gear back on. I didn't have a chain ring. I just had a straight gear. So I get on the bike, try it out, make sure everything's right. And I'm like, Dad, it feels like you changed my gear. Like you dropped me 2 tooths or something. What's up? What's up with this? I need the 45. And he said, no, that is a 45. You said, you're kidding me. And so my dad says, well, hold on a minute. Let me measure those cranks. So he goes over and measures the cranks. And I mean, you can do the math. 175s to 192s. I mean, that's a pretty good difference. I mean, it's like, what is that? That's like 3/4 of an inch, maybe an inch.
Yeah.
So then we go, here I am, I'm racing 15 expert, or maybe it may have been 16 expert. It's been a while, 40 years. So I get on the gate for my first race. I blow the doors off of my competition. I mean, I smoked them. And so the next thing you would naturally ask is, or think about is, so you're going to get out there a short distance, and then you're not going to be able to keep up with those cranks. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
but that wasn't the case. I mean, if you think about your legs, an inch is not that big of a difference on your legs. It's true, I noticed that I topped out a little sooner, but I already had such a lead on everybody that I passed. I just needed to maintain the lead. And so I started winning all the time. And I mean, I could blow my start, work my way through the pack, and get to the first jump before everybody else. And that was an expert at nationals. And so when I got to 17 years old, other kids were starting to get bigger. And I should mention, those cranks work good indoors or outdoors. So, men are, right, Kevin, right? So my dad says, bigger is better. So my dad had this idea that he's going to make some cranks that are longer than 192s. So this is fascinating. So we're at an indoor race. It was called the Monroe Indoor Arena. And there was like a winter national there going on. It happened probably every other year we'd hold a national there. And so the way my dad made some longer cranks, he had to go to a bike shop, actually shop after shop, to find another set of Ashtabula cranks. And so what he did is he took in the very middle of the crank arm, or actually not quite the middle, probably about 2 inches from the end of the where the pedal is, 2 inches up. He'd cut it off right there and grind off about half the metal on that pedal. I'm sorry, on that crank arm. Then he'd take another set of cranks, the cranks that he just bought, cut those off, and then weld that right on the side of it after he ground it to fit. And of course, he had to do some work with some jigging, some measurements and all that, so that one crank wasn't longer than the other. And when he was done, he made me a pair. In your post, it says 202s, but they were actually 205s, 205 millimeter cranks. So,
and what was bigger better?
Well, let's put it this way. If you got a pair of 192s on and you got a 45/16, it feels like a 44. If you were, let's say you had 180s, okay, 180s, you can go up a full tooth and it feels slightly easier even. So if you had a 44/16 and you went up to a 45/16, it feels slightly easier than a 44/16 with 192s. So with a pair of 205s, it's unreal. I mean, it is unreal. So I got to tell you this. So everybody knew that I was running these Ashtabulas. Clarence Perry ran Ashtabulas. He's such a big guy. He ran Ashtabulas for a while. He's got some stories. I actually watched him snap off a pair out of the gate before. Occasionally they'd have a flaw. It did, yeah. So occasionally you get one that has a flaw. Apparently mine didn't. And so I got to tell you about these 205s. So I'm at the Oakwood Arena. You guys are going to be fascinated by this story. So I'm at the Oakwood Arena. I got a pair of 205s. The Oakwood Arena was kind of near Fort Lewis. It was in Tacoma. That's kind of what I remember. And let's see, this is when I was 16 years old. I think I was 16. Yeah. And I didn't have a sponsor yet. I may have had a local sponsor, but like a co-sponsor or something. And Gary Ellis, his dad, I don't know that his dad was a track operator at the time, but he was a track official. So we're at this local single point race. There's probably like 35 people at the racetrack, 35 riders. It's a small race. Gary Ellis was already getting a pretty good name for him. He was already, I think he already had a full factory ride at that time. And his dad was a track operator, and that was very helpful for him getting around. His dad was also I think it was a travel agency. They owned a travel agency, and that kind of gave Gary an advantage to travel around. Well, anyhow, I brought it up for this reason. So here we are, we're at this race, single point race, and I got a pair of 205s on my bike. And on the indoor, I'm running a 45/16. Now, normally, if I just had a pair of 175s, I'd be running a 43 because it's a short track. You got a short, you don't really have a hill. And the first jump is a wood jump. So, imagine you don't have a lot of momentum out of the gate. So you need a lower. So most people would run a 43/16. So I'm running a 45/16. Gary Ellis is up on the gate, and we've raced before, and he'd blow my doors away most of the time because he was more experienced than I was. But when I put on those 205s, something changed. So my very first modal, I won't forget it. The gate drops. I hole shotted. I almost pulled the front end up too high. So I had to kind of wait for it to come down to beat my strokes. I was the first one in the quarter, and I won that race. The next moto, I did it again. But this time, my dad said I was about 4 bike lengths ahead of Gary Ellis by the time I cleared when I was between the first jump and the corner, I was about 4 bike lengths ahead of Gary Ellis. So I entered the corner, which was a completely flat corner. In fact, on your reel or your little introduction video, there's a picture of Clarence Perry and me. and I'm in front.
Yeah.
That's the same track, and it's a flat corner. So as I entered the corner, Gary Ellis rammed in the back of me so hard that my bike came up in the air, and it shot me way out into the turn one. He crashed on the infield, and his dad was yelling at his son, saying, "You're disqualified for the day." And I remember that day very vividly. And I think Gary was rather shocked that this newbie on the block was able to beat him with a kind of a dated bike and some custom-made cranks. So that was interesting. Now, of course, things worked out between me and Gary, but I was running those same cranks in the picture where Clarence Perry is behind me. Those were 205s that I was running at that racetrack.
I'm going to ask two questions that other people may have. The first question is, you're in a turn, if you had your pedal down, you never hit your pedal on the ground, right?
I did have a problem. In fact, those 205s were long enough that, well, I got another story. I'm not going to go there yet. So
you can just lean your bike up on the pedal, dude.
Well, one thing my dad told me not to do is a bunch of jumping, because I had a lot more leverage on the bottom bracket. So I got to tell you a little bit more about the 205s, because they had their limitations. They were fine on indoor tracks. That didn't have a lot of hill. They were fine on those kind of indoor tracks that were really soft, where you take, like if you stop pedaling, you would stop in 20 feet, 30 feet, down squishy. They were great for tracks where you needed a really low gear. And since I was running long cranks and a tall gear, every time I cranked, I would just pull away, because it was as easy as a 42-16, but yet I was making the progress of a 45-16. And I actually think that probably between Clarence Perry and myself, we introduced to the BMX world the idea of running longer cranks than 175s. Later on, a lot of pros started running 180s. And I remember Gary Ellis tried the 180s, didn't like him, went back to 175s. Then later on, he returned back to 180s. This is when it was all one-piece cranks, and there were no three-piece cranks yet, unless you were a little kid and you had aluminum crank. Then later, Profile and other companies came out with 185s, or you could order them. Then they came out with 190s. And in the race that you see me racing with Harry Leary, I was racing 190s. I never ran a shorter crank in my BMX career, shorter than 190 millimeters. That's the shortest crank I ever ran, other than when I bent those 175s, the loading zone.
Wow, dude. And no one tried to copy you. No one said, "Hey, make me a pair of 192s."
Well, you could buy one on U2s if you could find them.
Or 205s.
205s. Well, I got another story for you. You're just going to laugh at this. So I want to first mention, yes, there was some problems with the 205s in the corners. There was a time at the Oakwood Arena where I went around it, and just as I was coming out of the corner, I went to pedal. I pedal flipped the ground, and I wrecked right there because they were so long. So I had to look. So every time I'd come out of the corner, I'd make sure that I kind of pulled the handlebars up, kind of pulled a wheelie, and then I'd keep that pedal from hitting on the inside. I did have problems with that. That did take some getting used. Then later in, it was like 9 months later or something, like the very next year, there was a national at the Monroe Arena, and my dad, he was kind of like the mad scientist. I love my dad. He's passed away now, but he decided, are you sitting down? Yeah, you're sitting down.
Yeah.
He decided to make a set of 2 15s. Did you hear that? 2 15s. And he made them all up. And one of those pedals was just slightly crooked. he didn't quite get the jig right. So that was kind of weird. I had to kind of get used to that. I won't forget it. I showed up Saturday for the races, and Kurt Gardner looked at my bike. And when he saw those cranks, he wasn't happy. I'll just leave it at that. He said he started talking to one of the track officials and the guy on the gate and said, those cranks are illegal. That's totally cheating. That is not fair. And I said, why is it not fair? I said, Kurt, what's wrong with this? Why is it not fair? It's because nobody can go and buy cranks like that. And the next thing I said out of my mouth, would you even run them?
Yeah, really.
So anyhow, I went ahead and raced those 205 or those 215s, and they were good to the first jump, but it was, I mean, your handlebars are waving back and forth so much just because of how long the cranks are. I also broke a chain. I broke two chains, one with the 205 set and one with the 215s. And so when I got number one in the 7 expert class at the end of the year, I got something in the mail from a company called Acme Chain. And they sent me this chain that was really big, really thick. It looked like a small mini bike chain or like a motorcycle chain. It had roller bearings in it. And so it was supposed to be super strong. And so I ran that for a long time. I got a lot of conversation about that. People would look at that and go, that looks like a motorcycle chain. And then people that knew me would say, he's got those big cranks, so he needs that super strong chain.
Nice, dude. Yeah, I would think that a nice thick chain on that bike would look trick as hell.
It was trick. I mean, that chain was about a third wider than a standard chain.
Wow.
And almost twice as wide as a Seda Sport. So
I'm going to interrupt you 1 second. I'll be right back. Right. Don't go nowhere, guys. I'll be right back.
I feel like telling you guys some other stuff, but maybe I'll just wait till he's back. Here, I'll show you a picture.
All right. I'm having charging issues. Okay, what's that? Okay.
That was just for the intermission. just a picture.
Man, this has been a
Harry Leary. Can you see it?
Yeah, is that the Pro Magnum?
Oh, that's a casting.
Hey, tell me, you were telling me a story.
That's just a Pro Magnum.
Okay. You were telling me a story over the phone about the fastest guy that you saw at the track that didn't have a chance to make it, dude. Can you share that story, because it was fascinating.
Wait, say that again.
You were telling me a story about a kid that didn't have all the benefits of a nice family and stuff like that, but was fast as hell, and he could have been a star, right? Remember that? You told me that story?
Yep. Actually, I've seen that more than a few times. I mean, just think about it. We've all seen people that were coming up through the ranks that were young, and you could just see the talent. And there is a name that came to mind, but I think most people know it. There was a guy named Eric Jones. Does that sound familiar? Eric Jones.
Never heard of him, but go ahead.
I remember that guy when he was, I want to say he was 15 years old, and I was watching him come up through novice. He was a big kid. He was really strong. Kind of reminded me of Clarence Perry, kind of a miniature Clarence Perry. And I tell you what, the talent that guy had and the athletic ability that he had, if he had a team sponsor and a full ride, I think he would have been #1 pro. I think he could have won some Grand Nationals. I mean, he did really good. I know all the big guys, Gary Ellis, you know, Pete Lonkarovich, all those guys probably would remember that name, Eric Jones, but that guy was incredible. I mean, I watched him at a national in Eugene, Oregon, pull like a 5 bike length lead on every top name pro, 3 pro mains in a row. I mean, he was incredible. And anyhow, if you can find Eric Jones, you gotta try to find that guy. That guy was incredible.
And he never turned pro. He faded out at 16X or something.
No, he turned pro.
Okay.
He definitely turned. And like I said, he was beating everybody, every big name, I mean, guys in your podcast will know who I'm talking about. Eric Jones.
Eric Jones. Shout out to Eric Jones.
Yep.
Dude, it was.
Hats off.
Go ahead.
We had a set of doubles on some trails in Redmond that were a lot of guys were afraid to ride. And I went through this. We had 4 sets of 25-foot doubles, and that was at the Bellevue track. At the Redmond track, we had this section called the rhythm section. It was really technical, and it was downhill. And I actually watched Eric Jones do that whole rhythm section uphill backwards, and that was incredible. Like at first I didn't think it was possible. So I actually practiced a few times, followed him through it a few times, and then finally I was able to do it. But it was, I mean, it took every ounce of strength you had, and he did it with ease. And the guy was so talented. He was so gifted. And I think if he had the the support that a lot of the big names that we hear today, he would have definitely been like. He easily could have been like a 4-time world champion, AA pro. And it's just, the reason why it didn't happen for him is because he didn't have the support. He didn't have the family support. He just didn't get it. I think he may have had a factory ride option that came his way, but I don't know whatever happened to that. So nice. I want to conclude on those long cranks. So, and then I want to get into what I ate in my diet that helped me in racing, because there's some secrets to that. So we ended up getting rid of those 205s. I'm sorry, those 215s. They were too long. In fact, they were so long that I could put the pedal down and just kind of kick my handlebars just a little bit to the side like a kickstand. The bike would stand up. It was ridiculous, but it was kind of a fun thing to do. But I ended up not able to race them because the pedals were a little bit wiggly when you pedaled because they weren't jigged out quite right for cranking. My dad did a really good job in the 215s, and even the 205s. Even the 205s were too long for anything indoor. I'm sorry, I'm getting confused. Anything outdoor. So it had to be a short indoor track or a track with a really shallow first hill. Otherwise, it wasn't practical because you top out really quick. But I think that if I could have had, I think my favorite size would have been like 188s, but nobody probably makes them. 180. I tried 185s one time, and I liked them, but I felt like I was faster with 190s. So that's what I stuck with. That's what I was pulling Harry Leary with, was 190s. So
in 97, or is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, 1997. Yep.
Nice, dude. Those cranks should be in the Hall of Fame or something, dude. Huh?
Yeah, I should tell you one other thing about that my dad did. It was really cool. So anybody who had a one-piece crank was stuck with a bike with no sealed bearings for that bottom bracket. So they got dirt in them real easy. I think you probably remember that. My dad actually made a leather seal that he put in there, and that actually kept my bearings as clean as if they were sealed. Initially, it was kind of had a lot of friction. I remember putting them on without a bike chain. If you went to spin the cranks, they'd only turn 2 revolutions. It just turned like they were pretty stiff. I didn't like that initially, but after, I don't know, a couple of races, they loosened up and it spun like normal. But that was a leather seal, and that did the trick. That preserved them. Then they actually came out. Here's something that's going to probably blow your mind. There was a company that came out with sealed bearings for one-piece cranks. And I finally got myself, I found some of those at a bike shop called the Bike Factory. It was kind of a one-off thing, and that was cool.
They were
But
for
the
American
three-piece
bottom
cranks,
brackets.
Yep. Not a
Yeah,
European
I have.
bottom bracket, just a standard bottom.
I've seen them. You could only you put one side of the bearings in, and then you fish the crank arm through, and then you have to put the bearing over the crank arm, and then pop it in. Right? That's how you put it in.
Yeah. If at first it doesn't seem like it'll work.
Yeah.
And you have to do it a certain way, just like you said. Otherwise, you couldn't get it together.
Yeah. You're breaking up again.
Oh,
You there?
what I did?
Okay.
Yeah. What it worked? What worked for me the best out of all the combinations I had was, it was cool having the 2.5s. But as I got stronger and I started lifting weights, I didn't need cranks with that much leverage, and so we got rid of the 205s, and those just kind of went on the shelf. And then I just stuck with 190s, and 190s was perfect. Plus any kind of some people probably don't think about this, but a crank that's solid actually has more flex than tubing. And so your profile crank, your GT crank, any of those hollow tubed 3-piece cranks are going to be a lot stiffer. You're getting rid of your flex, and it was a lot more responsive. So once I went to the profile 190, which I got from Scott Matchell, I think he tried them out, decided they were way too long, and I said, I'll take them. So I bought them off Scott, and I appreciated that. So on that bike that I was racing Harry Leary with, I had titanium axle front and rear, titanium bracket, titanium seat rails. I actually had aluminum nuts, not chromoly nuts, aluminum nuts on my front axles, because you don't have to have those torqued crazy tight. On the back of the bike, I ran an aluminum nut on the opposite side of the cog, because you'd never pull that one forward. On the right side, because of those 190 millimeter cranks, and I had to do this on all my bikes with those long cranks, I had to have a chain tensioner on the back. Otherwise, it almost didn't matter how tight you had that axle, you're going to pull that wheel forward because of the leverage of the. And then you're just reefing on your parts all the time. So I had to run a special chain tensioner to keep my wheel from pulling forward. I had to have an extra thick chain. And because I was lifting weights, I mean, I could, like I said, I could squat 405 once, or I could do 20 reps with 225 pounds. And Dan Van and he will testify that. He's seen me do it completely flat, 20 reps, 225 on my shoulder.
Not too bad,
that's
man.
Really
Pretty
strong
good.
thought. Now, here's another factor too. I did not have very big calves. I was actually a little ashamed of my calves. I had skinny calves and big thighs. And I think that's one of the reasons why I was able to run those cranks. Is because guys with a big, you've seen it before, guys with just bodybuilding size calves, they can't spin stuff really fast. They need they need shorter cranks and a taller gear because they got so much weight, so much strength in the legs. But wiry guys like me go to 190s. There's so many guys that could have done so much better if they ran longer cranks. And finally, people started to. Gary Ellis finally was running 180s. You'd have to ask him, but I think he even went to 185s for a while. So
I never even knew they
me, I
made
think
185s. I was 180 the whole time.
Nope, they made 185s. Yep. I think it was Redline that made them. Might be wrong, it might be Profile. I'm sure somebody that's watching will school us on that. But I seen a set of cranks that were stamped 185. And I almost want to say that Clarence Perry was running them, but don't quote me on that. But I've seen them before.
Well,
so hey,
do you still what happened to the cranks? Did you throw them away or did you keep them?
I kept them for a while, and then after a while, I'm like, I'm never going to run these things again. And I ended up, I think I put them on some kid's bike, some young kid's bike that needed a set of cranks. Oh,
there
I
you
gotta
go,
tell you
man.
a story. You're going to love this story. So you're going to love this story, and then I'm going to talk to you about how critical it is, not just for racing well, but your health and preventing disease. But so I was at a race in Utah. No, it was not Utah. Yes, it was somewhere in Salt Lake City, somewhere around there. We were kind of doing a national tour there. I was 17 years old. I had those super long 205 cranks, 215s. And I remember in one of the mains, I was an expert at this point. I was a 17 expert. And I went over the first jump. There was a wreck the race before, but when I went over the jump, they had kind of put everything back together and they had the hay bales in the wrong place. So I came over the jump, there's the hay bales. I went right into them, went over the bars, lost my chance for winning the national for that main. I was not very happy about that. So I rode all the way back to the hotel on my bike. I didn't even want to wait for my parents to go there. I just wanted to, I was kind of hot, not very happy. I left my bike at the swimming pool and was going to go swimming, but I didn't have anything to swim in. I wasn't going to swim in my racing clothes. And then I saw a black widow, a huge one. And I started playing with it with a stick, and got bored with that, and decided that I was going to get on my bike and take it to the second floor and see if I can get in. And I noticed that my bike had gotten stolen. So I got my bike ripped off at the swimming pool. So a bad day got really bad really quick. So my parents come back to the hotel, and I had to break the news that my bike got stolen. And my dad was furious. And he said, "It's your responsibility. You should have kept track of it. It was your fault you lost it, and I'm not buying another one." I said, "I need one for tomorrow's race." He said, "That's too bad. You should have kept an eye on your bike." So I asked my sister if I could ride her bike through the neighborhood. So I started riding my bike around the neighborhoods. And I'm like, some punk is riding my bike, and I'm going to find that thing. And so I rode for probably, on this little girl's bike with a uni seat with sew ups. Can you imagine that? A 17 expert riding this little kid's bike. So I never found my bike in the neighborhood. So it was time to go to dinner. And so I don't know where we went, but we got in the car in the 66 Buick Riviera. And mind you, this is like 1984 or something like that. Maybe it was 1985. Anyhow, and we're going down the street, and up ahead at night, just on the main boulevard, I see this kid riding a bike, and I didn't think it was my bike because there was no number plate and no pads on the bike. But I saw something that told me it was my bike. I could see this guy's feet going like this, really high. And I could tell by the cranks that has to be my bike. So we come up to the guy, and I look at it, and my heart was just pounding. That's my bike. Now we had a friend of ours in the front seat, and they hadn't been in this car before, and they couldn't figure out how to get the door open. And my dad's pulling up next to the person, and we didn't want him to take off, because if they would have taken off down through the trails, he would have been gone. So I cranked down the window. one of those little rear quarter windows on this Buick Riviera. I leaned out of the window and started climbing out as we were approaching him, and I just grabbed him and I got him in headlock, and I pulled out of the car and wrecked on the side of the ground. We were going about 15 miles an hour, and it turned into a wrestling match. And it turned into a big wrestling match. The guy was bigger than me. I just kept him in a good chokehold. And then finally, my mom, we didn't have cell phones back then. So my mom runs across the street. She calls the cops. The cops show up. By the way, the wrestling match ended in a puddle. So I'm laying in a puddle. I got this guy in a headlock, and it was epic. You had to have been there. So the cops show up, right? And when the cops showed up, they said, "Oh, this guy. Oh yeah, I'm familiar with him. We've arrested him about 8 times." And he said, "I really wish you would have done me a favor and took him up the mountain and let him out at about 60 miles an hour." That's what the cops said. And so here's what blew my mind away also. So the guy said that the reason why he's been arrested so many times and he's not in jail is because he's only 13. That's the biggest 13-year-old I've ever seen. He was bigger than me, and I was a 17 expert, and he was 13 years old. I mean, he was, and so hey, I was super happy. I got my bike back. So I show up at the races, and when people saw that I had my bike, they were just like, unbelievable. We told them the story. They said that is extremely rare. Nobody ever gets their bike back when they lose at the, when you're away from ground.
Can I share a story with you?
What's that?
Can I share a story with you about a stolen bike?
I still didn't hear what you said.
Can I share a story with you about a stolen bike?
Oh yeah, go ahead.
My brother and I, we lived on a really major street in South Pasadena, California, and we used to leave our bikes on the front porch while we're watching MTV and playing Atari. And my brother's mongoose got swiped off our front porch. And we went out. The bike was gone. We were all bummed out. We were like, "Oh man, it was he had like Z rims on it, aluminum bars, mongoose double clamp stem." And we thought we wrote it off. We thought the bike was gone. Like 3 months later, it's my birthday, and I choose to go to Huntington Beach, California, to go for my birthday to the beach. And on the way to the beach, we had boogie boards tied to the top of my mom's Mustang, and the rope broke, and the boogie boards went flying off in the middle of 405. My mom pulled over. We ran out to get the boogie boards. And we were delayed like maybe half an hour, 45 minutes trying to put the boogie boards back on top of the car. We drive down to Huntington Beach, and we're unloading the car, and we're getting the barbecue out, the cooler and everything. And we're just starting to set everything up right next to the boardwalk. Normally we're farther towards the water, but this one day we happen to set up like real close to the boardwalk. And as I'm putting the folding chairs out, I turn around, and there's a little kid riding my brother's bike down the boardwalk. And I go, "Hey, dude, there's your bike, man." And he goes, "Quit messing with me, man." I go, "No, dude, there's your bike." And sure as shit, there was a little, we were probably, 13, 14 at the time, and this kid was probably 8 or 9. And "Where'd you get this bike from?" "Oh, my older brother let me borrow his bike." We called the cops. The cops came, and the cops were, "Well, how can you prove this is your bike?" And I forgot how my brother proved that it was his bike, but yeah, he got his bike back like 3 months later at the beach. So I can relate to good stories like that, retrieving people's bikes.
That's interesting. The cops never asked, "Is this your bike?" But I think with my mom, my dad, my sister, and plus this guy's history, they put it together.
Yeah.
So I want to talk about
stuff, man.
I want to talk about fuel.
Okay.
Fuel that you put in your body. So I have done a little bit of research on this, but there's many world-class athletes that are total vegetarians. I'm sure you've heard of that.
Sure, yeah.
And I found that rather interesting. So I wasn't a vegetarian until probably 96. I started becoming a vegetarian. And here's what I noticed. My endurance was substantial. Like it improved substantially. I'll put it this way. After one of those pro motos at the Lumberjack National, I could have went right up to the gate and did it again. No problem. But before I was a vegetarian and I crossed that finish line, my legs would have so much lactic acid in them that I'd be shot and I'd be winded. So I noticed that on a vegetarian diet, I had a lot more endurance. Another thing is when you eat vegetables, fruits, nuts, grains, those kind of things, they digest easier. And so your stomach doesn't work as hard and you have more energy. I mean, I know this isn't a health food class, but I just thought I'd mention that what you put in your body has a huge difference. I mean, soda pop, that's not going to help you on the racetrack. A Red Bull, I know Red Bull is cool, tastes great, but it's really not the ideal fuel for the race. If they want to drink one of those after the race, hey, more power to them, but not during the race. Your body needs to stay hydrated. Soda pop actually dehydrates you. It actually does that. A Gatorade would be a much better choice. Just plain water with a little bit of salt, maybe a little bit of lemon. When I was racing at the Lumberjack Nationals, my wife was giving me some cantaloupe between the mains, and that gave me really good energy, and it digests really quick, really fast. It makes a huge difference. People in the Olympics, they pay close attention to what they're eating. Same, any of those guys that run track and field, they're very mindful of how they eat, and that makes a huge difference. And I wish I had known that a lot earlier in my career, because it really would have helped me. But that's a tip for your viewers. Just try it for about 10 days. You will absolutely notice a substantial difference in your endurance.
Were you worried about your diet? This is back when you were an adult, right? Not when you were a 17X. You're 17X, you're eating Doritos and Pepsi, right?
Yeah, with hot dogs and all the other junk. I know that there were other. I know there's some big time racers, big names that were pretty secretive about what they ate. There's certain guys I never saw eating the junk food. You never saw them doing that. I don't want to name names, but there's certain racers I remember, they were secretive about what they were eating. And I think it's like, hey, we're not going to give any trade secrets away here. But yeah, what you eat makes a huge difference. So like these days, I still mountain bike. I went out mountain biking up at Sakai Bike Park with about 15 guys. And most of the guys I went riding with were 24 to 35 years old. I'm 58 years old. Not one of those guys could keep up with me on my 1996 mountain bike. They could not keep up with me.
Climbing and down, or just climbing?
Climbing. And then when I did the downhill stuff, I did pretty good. They had a better fork than I did. Some of those guys have, they got the hydraulic brakes front and back, and they're like, man, this old dude, I can't believe him. It was just hilarious. But they're not taking care of themselves. I mean, just before the ride, they're down in a Red Bull, or they're drinking a soda pop, or they're smoking a joint. Of course, they're not going to perform well. I mean, I used to have a 600 horsepower muscle car, and you don't just put junk fuel down that. You know what I mean? You might mix a little bit of aviation fuel on that, baby. If you're going to the racetrack, your body's the same way. And also, how you eat affects your mental clarity. It affects your memory, and it affects your aging process. So,
what about physical training besides? I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, physical training.
I know you lifted weights after, but you weren't. Well, what kind of physical training were you doing when you were 16, 17, or did you even care at that particular point? You were still a young man. you didn't worry about it?
When I was 15, I was told, and it's probably, I think it's true, if you start getting into weightlifting too early, it can stunt your growth. You can end up being a lot shorter. So you don't really want to get into hard weightlifting until your bones, until your bones have a chance to develop. You get most of your height. But I didn't really know that. I remember in zero period weight training in high school, we lifted weights. Nothing significant. That probably helped. One of the things that turned me on to lifting weights is when I turned 17, a lot of the other guys were getting bigger. I like I said, a small guy. I'm only like 5'8". I'm not really that much taller than Harry Leary. And I remember going to the Grand Nationals 3 different years, and I didn't make it. And I was very frustrated with that. And I started to think to myself, the reason why I'm not making these mains is I'm not strong enough. And these guys, I was writing a dated. And in fact, I never made a Grand National main as an expert in the American ABA. I did it in Canada as a pro, but it wasn't until I started working out with weights and became a vegetarian that my game came back in. When I was 16 and 17, I don't know why it was, but I think that just having the family support. Once I turned pro, my parents weren't showing up in the races anymore, and so I suppose that could have had a little effect on psyche. But once I started lifting weights and eating a vegetarian diet, things turned around. In fact, I could go faster on the track than I could handle it. I remember I was at the World Cup championships in Nanaimo, Canada, and they were expecting that I very well could be the next world champion. I could actually go down that back straightaway way faster than I could handle the bike. It was amazing. And at the end of the race, I was not completely shot. I wasn't winded. I could see all the other guys huffing and puffing, and I wasn't huffing and puffing like them. I was breathing, but I wasn't like completely done after I crossed the finish line. And I just point to that vegetarian diet. In fact, check this out, Kevin. The vegetarian diet is the oldest diet in the book.
I'll take your word for it, man. I'll take your word for it.
In Genesis chapter 1, verse 29, it talks about a vegetarian diet in the Bible. And I'm not going to get all into that, but I just want to mention that it's the oldest diet in the book. So I want to talk about lifting weights. If you're going to compete in this sport, it's to protect your body. You need to lift weights, especially overhead shoulder press. Anything to do with the shoulders, you want to train those shoulders to protect them. I remember at a race, it was a pro race. It was when I first got back into racing again, because let me tell you a quick story. I raced from like 1981 to like 1987. And the last year of my racing, I wasn't doing, actually 1988, I wasn't doing as well. I had a lot of things going on in my life at that time. And I was still riding a bike that was too short for me. And that geometry was not helping me. If I just got like a GT or something, just a pro GT would have made a big difference. So I got out of the sport. I met some buddies back in 1993. And I used to use my BMX bike to check the mail. That's all I used it for, just to check the mail. But it was like 93 or 94. A friend of mine who's passed away now, he told me he had a track in Bellevue with some pretty good jumps. And I said, really? He said, you want to try this? Want to come out and check it out? I said, well, I guess so. So I went and checked it out. I rode around, jumped some jumps, and helped him build jumps. Here we are. We're like grown adults still operating a shovel and building jumps, right? So anyhow, I decided to go to a race. And I thought I had lost it. Like, I didn't know if I could still do this anymore because it had been like, 8 years. And so I show up on my bike with my old uniform that I could barely fit into from 1987. And I get on the racetrack and everybody's looking at my bike going, wow, Lowry's back. I'm like, whoa, oh, this is. When the gate dropped, because I was weights with Danny, I mean, I totally had the whole shot. I won the first moto. I think I won the second moto, and on the third moto, because there was just enough pros there was no main, just enough pros to just do 3 runs. And when I was going down the back straightaway after turn 1, I rolled my pedals just before the top of the doubles. And I think I was probably going about 27, 28 miles an hour. And it's hard to imagine how to picture this, but I went over the jump. My seat bucked me off of the bike, and I'm flying through the air, and I got my pedal or my handlebars between my legs. I completely cleared the landing, and I landed all the way down in the flats. Now, the natural thing to do is to start running as soon as you hit the ground, but you're going way faster than you can run. And I just turned into a big ball. We've all been here before. We've all had these kind of wrecks.
Yeah.
Mike Albright saw that wreck. Imagine, I jumped a set of doubles, doing about 27, 28 miles an hour, cleared the doubles, landed all the way in the flats down. It was like falling off a roof, but with some speed. I hit the ground like a rag doll. My bike goes bouncing down the track. I turn into a big ball like this, and I can see all my competitors coming over the hill. I'm like, this is not good. They all parted ways and went off into the side and off to the left. And of course, when you hit the ground that hard, you can't breathe.
Yeah.
And so I knocked the wind out of myself. Really pretty bad. Mike Albright said it's the worst wreck he's ever saw. At least in that time. That was in probably like 1995. And I think the only reason why I didn't break my collarbone is because of all the lifting. So my point being is that lifting weights, working on your chest muscles, working on your lower back and your upper back, weightlifting protects your body from injury. And otherwise, I probably would have had a busted collarbone from that. I did get a little bit of a bump. You know how on your shoulder, there's, at least my body, there's a little bit of a bump on this side and a little bit of a bump on that side. It's flatter on this side from that wreck. And everybody runs over and the first thing they say is, don't move, because they think you might have a broken neck. And I couldn't breathe, so I couldn't tell them everything's okay.
We've all been there, dude.
And you just go, and you just start
you're
pumping air back in your lungs.
Yeah.
And you feel like you're going to die. But what you eat, exercising, those are important things for success. Not for. So let's see what else we got. Oh, here's another thing that you might find interesting. The gear that I used to run, my rear cog and my front gear, when I had those really long cranks, 4215. Now 4215 is pretty much the same as a 4516, just barely easier. Like, it's not even worth talking about. And I ran that 4215 because you have a lighter rear sprocket, a lighter front sprocket, and a shorter chain, and it's a little bit harder to derail it. But there's one problem that a lot of people don't think about. When your cog is smaller, let's see if I'm trying to figure out how I can explain this. Imagine having a gear that's like almost as big as the tire. You put a chain on that, and that chain is going to spend more time turning the wheel, okay?
Yeah.
But if you had a gear that was like a 12-tooth sprocket, it's spending more time, more effort is being made to pull the axle forward rather than turn the wheel.
Okay.
So really, you really want to run the largest gear that you can on the back and a bigger gear on the front, like a 17 or something on the back. But the problem with that, and I think the reason why it never really caught on, is you'd have to have such a huge front chainring. But, and, you know, when I learned that, I got rid of the 15 and went to a 16. So I think a 16-tooth sprocket, hands down, is the best way to go in the back. Those guys that run 14s and 15s, they're actually, they're losing some leverage. They're actually losing a performance by doing that. And when I learned that, I changed it. And I guarantee it's measurable. If you had a dial indicator on it, you put some weight on it, there's a way to calculate it, but I guarantee you that you're better off with a bigger gear and back, and just change accordingly up front for the torque.
Yeah, I think I ran a 4316. I never even changed it once. No matter what track I was at, it was 4316.
Nice.
I mean, maybe that's why I never won a national. I don't know.
Hey, here's a neat little trick, a neat little weight saving trick. So of course you want to use short spoke nipples, double butted spokes, titanium axles, unless you're over 200 pounds, titanium bottom bracket. And then instead of using that piece of rubber that stretches around your rim to protect your spokes from poking through, just use a piece of electrical tape. Yeah, just use a piece of electrical tape. It's lighter. Every little bit makes a difference. People don't think about
it. That struck a nerve, man, because that's what my dad did on my bike my whole life. He never bought one rim strip in his life. He put black electrical tape. That was hilarious,
it
man.
Makes sense. Hey, the other piece too is the other thing to consider that, well, okay, it doesn't really matter so much with BMX bikes, but there are some people that have done this. You know, have your valve stem. Well, your valve stem's the heaviest part in your wheel, as far as that's what throws it off. So we've all turned our bicycles upside down and cranked the wheels real fast, and the bike starts going like this and jiggling. Well, one way you can correct that, you could put wheel weights on it, but you could also put brass spoke nipples, the big ones, on the opposite side of your stem, and you can actually balance your wheels. And it actually will make a difference on the track. And once you get over about 25 miles an hour, your bike will ride smoother. I never did it, but I've heard people say that the bike feels better, especially in, to actually balance your wheels. But for whatever it's worth, some people are probably going to say, "Oh, well, this guy's crazy."
Hey, you brought up double-butted spokes. What is the benefit to a double-butted spoke? I've never understood them. I don't understand why people had them. I know a double-butted spoke is, it's thinner in the middle and it's bigger on the ends, right? Right.
Well, here's
why is that
benefit?
Why do people? What's so good about them?
Well, what they've done is shaved off weight. That's what they've done. If you look at a spoke that's not double butted, and you were to take a micrometer on that and measure that, and then compare it to the fat end of a double butted spoke, it should be identical, except for it's lighter because you don't have anything in the middle. It's interesting that you brought up the spokes, because Harry Leary, in that race that you saw, he actually had titanium spokes. And in that day, that was like probably about $400 for a set of titanium spokes. And you know how titanium is. Titanium and aluminum has to be lubricated and taken apart. You can't just put it together dry and leave it that way. It'll actually start fusing together, and you won't be able to take it apart. I think most bike shop guys know that you don't want to put aluminum and titanium together. So imagine having titanium spokes and aluminum spoke nipples. You better grease those babies before you put it together. Otherwise, you may never get them apart.
Dude, I always thought that double-butted spokes were meant for strength, not to shave weight. So that makes sense of what you told me, that because I always thought, well, I thought it was to increase the strength at the ends, not to shave weight. That was my
Yeah,
impression.
like I said, if you take a micrometer, you know what that is, and you measure the fat part of double-butted spoke, and you that to a standard spoke, you will see that the standard spoke that is not double-butted is the same thickness as the fat end of the spoke. So you have a lighter on the end spoke in the area that it's not the weakest. So where does the spoke usually break? It breaks where it goes into the spoke. Well,
by the nipple.
The nipple breaks off, or breaks off up at the hub, unless it gets bent in the middle. The other thing is how you lace your wheels makes a difference too. If you look at a motorcycle and how they lace their spokes, they do not bend the spokes around each other. They're laced in a way to where they don't touch. And I'm sure all of us have rode a bike where when the spokes are touching and they get loose, they creak. You can hear your wheels making weird sounds. Now it's true when you lace your wheels in a way that where the spokes are touching each other really tightly, it does stiffen the whole wheel assembly. But what it also does is it causes weak spots in your spokes. It creaks and it makes noise. Think about this. When I raced at the World Cup and at this race here at Sumner, most of those guys were running aluminum frames. Okay, I think everybody was. I think I'm the only one on the track that had a chromoly frame, a cast and chromoly frame. Well, a chromoly frame actually has more flex, so it doesn't beat you up on the track so bad. Well, when you have wheels on your bike that are laced up like a motorcycle where they're not touching each other, the ride is a lot more comfortable and it's noticeable. I'm not going to say it's as soft as like running Z rims, but it's noticeably more comfortable, and it does not affect your torque off the wheel. That's a complete folklore. So I laced my wheels up to where my spokes did not rub together.
Are you talking about radial lace?
Just a standard lace, yeah. It's a standard lace, but you don't bend them around each other before you put them in. I don't know if that makes sense. Next time you look at a motorcycle, take a look at how it's laced. It's laced just like your bicycle. The only difference is they did not put one spoke over the other one. And
bend it together.
Kind of hard to explain
I hear you.
Now you probably seen this before. There was a kind of effect that happened a while back where people would buy these really long spokes and they'd twist the spokes around each other about 4 times and then go terminate at the ends of the rim. And that created a very stiff rim. But again, that's your suspension system on the track. A BMX bike doesn't have any suspension. It's your body, your tire pressure. But if you're running an aluminum frame and you have your spokes laced the way I lace them, which is just like anybody else's bike, except for I don't the spokes around each other, you got a much better ride. And I can tell you what, when if you're in a national and you're going around a corner and the track is really hard and dry, a lot of guys go down because it's so bumpy and stiff. Well, it could be that having your bike spoked correctly could be the difference between sliding out in a corner or not. I was actually known for the guy that never crashes. But ironically, at that race that I raced with Harry Leary, I crashed in 2 mains. Actually, I crashed 3 times in 3 different mains. I crashed, I don't know if it was on Sunday or on Saturday, but I was first in the corner, or I shouldn't say that. I was the first one to the first jump. Every single pro main except for, I think, one time, and that was where I tangled up with somebody. In fact, I got a picture of it. Here's a picture. No, I think this is an open. Here's a picture of Harry Leary and I. Can you see it? Can you see that?
Yeah.
Where is it?
It's sideways, but yeah.
Oh, it's sideways?
Okay, no, you got it right. Turn it back.
Oh, I had it right?
Yeah.
Okay. Harry Leary is in 7th place.
All right. Are you 22? Is that what that is? 27? Orange helmet,
I'm
right?
23.
That's you. Okay.
I'm kind of crouching down.
Okay.
I tend to crouch down when I'm about to do the strike. You know what I mean?
When you're going to pounce, dude. Got it. I see it.
Here's the thing. I couldn't figure out why Harry Leary, actually, this is a moto. I couldn't figure out why Harry Leary was trying so hard to pass me in that race. It's because he had enough points that if he didn't pass me, he wasn't going to make it to the main. Or to the semi, I should say. I didn't know. I learned that later. The race where he passes me, that was just a qualifying race. That wasn't that was a third race. And apparently, because of what happened in this race, it was really important to do that. So I wanted to
give you props. You
that
pulled him.
So, I did that all weekend long. I mean, if it wasn't for 3 bike wrecks, I would have won both days. Hey, the guy that was able to stay on the bicycle, and since he was able to stay on the bicycle, he's the one that earned the win. So, I got to hand it to him. But I had one local competitor. I'm not gonna name names, but I have one local competitor that I think really didn't want me to win that race, and so everybody said that me and this other competitor and I were like magnets. As soon as we got next to each other entering the turn one, we'd come together, our pedals go into our spokes, and we both go over the bars, and that was it. But I will tell you something that you might find really funny. Danny V told me to share this. So there was one moto. It wasn't a semi or a main, but it was the very last corner, and I was trying to just reserve my energy for the main. And so as soon as I got ahead, I tried to take it easy around the track as much as I could to save my energy, because you don't want to wear yourself out before the mains. So on the last corner, Harry Leary is brilliant at passing people. That guy is sneaky. So I think I'm good, right? I'm going around the last corner. It's a flat, and Harry Leary dives underneath me. As soon as I saw him dive underneath me, I just sat down in my seat and gave up. And he saw me do that. And then he just kind of kept pedaling, and then just to make sure I was whatever. And then as soon as he took his eyes off me, he took off really fast, got behind him on the other side. I passed him before the finish line. So I had to show him a little bit about what and as a matter of fact, when you look at that race, the race that Mike Albright, I thank Mike Albright for putting that video up. I actually think I won that moto, because I know the announcers were saying what they were saying. I don't know. If you look at that moto and where the ladies are standing to write down one, I could be wrong, but it seemed like I may have gotten to the finish line sooner, but maybe not. Maybe not. I probably shouldn't have mentioned anything, but if you watch it again, I caught up to him quick down and just pedaling. But
yeah,
I got another race that you might find interesting.
Okay, go for it.
So I think all of us remember different races in our life. And there's about 4 different races that are very prominent to me. My very first time I raced on a BMX track, I never forgot that. The last time I raced a major race was the World Championship. But there was, when I was 17 years old, and I just wasn't ready to turn pro yet. I wanted to ride that number 1 on my plate a little bit longer. You know what I mean? I worked hard to earn that thing. I don't want to like turn pro and dump it. So Clarence Perry and one other pro, we had this thing called pro. When there wasn't enough pro to form a class, then the pros could join. I mean, somebody on the audience might be able to school me on this, but I think they called it a pro-am. So it was at Sumner BMX, my home track, and it was Clarence Perry. I want to say Paul Skornikoff. I don't know who it was. One of those other pros, local guys. And the gate drops. Now I happen to be. Everybody has a season in their life where everything is just on and you're really fast. Well, I happen to be really on at that time of year, and so I had the gate down. I was really fast out of the gate. I was really strong down the front straight. And I had those 20. No, I didn't have 205s on. I don't think. I think I just had 192s. I go down the corner, and all 3 Pro-Am motos I won, and Clarence kept getting second. And this was interesting because he was national number 10. And there's even a race with him being national number 10, beating Bart McDaniels and Gary Ellis, just blow the doors off those guys. So he was fast at that time, very fast. So the next weekend, he was getting razzed pretty good by some other pros. They're saying, I heard Kent Lowry beat you. You know, he's an amateur. And I don't remember the whole complete detail, but I overheard Clarence Perry saying, well, if you think you saw him yourself. And so the next Friday night race, Bart McDaniels, Troy Daniels, and I'm trying to think, Scott, I think it was Marty Enid. And, you know, those guys are pretty fast guys. Stops.
Hey, Kent, you've completely shut down, dude. I can't see anything. I can't hear anything. I think I've lost Kent. Well, I want to thank everybody for stopping by. Thank you very much for the support. I apologize that I lost Kent mid-story, but I appreciate all the support. If you enjoyed the podcast, please feel free to subscribe to the channel, and hopefully I'll bring Kent back another time, and we could talk BMX with them again. Thank you very much. And just let you know that I'm bringing out the merch. I got my sweatshirt going. I got the hat. I got a couple of different things. So it's going to be dropping for sale very soon. I know that there's some people out there that are really looking forward to getting a hat. So I will be making those available very shortly. Thank you very much for watching. I appreciate it. Thank you very much for commenting. And until next week, the track is closed. Peace out. Thank you. And thank you to Ken. And I'm sorry that we had a crappy connection. Take it easy, riders. Peace out.